I've been asked to go through the Oval Office fight yesterday and to analyse it and to explain what actually went wrong. And the person who asked me in the comment section says they're all at it. It's not true. It's not true. The argument is clearly begun by Vance. Then Trump cuts in, and Zelenskyy tries in vain to be professional and to put forward his point again and again. But it's clear to me that Zelenskyy doesn't really have a hope in hell. The decision has already been made. This is not about Zelenskyy losing an opportunity. This is about Trump finding an excuse to shift the blame for an exit onto a scapegoat, onto Zelenskyy. This is about scapegoating the person who was invited to the Oval Office to sign papers. And it's a disgraceful example of cod diplomacy by two amateurs who get it wrong at every single stage. And it needs to be analysed to explain very clearly why it went wrong. And nobody seems to have done this. Nobody seems to have gone through. I've looked in vain on YouTube and in the press, and there isn't that analysis. Maybe there will be tomorrow morning in the Sunday press, but so far there isn't anything. It was meant to be a routine diplomatic meeting centred on this critical minerals deal, a transactional arrangement Trump wanted in exchange for continued military support. It became something else. Zelenskyy, known for his deft handling of Western leaders, broke the usual playbook. He neither flattered nor yielded to Trump's characteristic need for dominance. Now, that may be a mistake. He may have misread the person that he was dealing with. The moment set the stage for this spectacle of belligerence, particularly from J.D. Vance, who has so far up till now been fairly restrained, except for his very odd speech in Munich. Trump's main claim is that Zelenskyy isn't grateful enough, which is a very strange thing. But it's Vance. Vance's line, the path to peace is maybe engaging in diplomacy, which suggests that Ukraine hasn't tried diplomacy, which is demonstrably false. Ukraine signed agreements with Russia, all of which Moscow violated. What sort of diplomacy, JD? Here lies the fundamental chasm. Ukraine has tried diplomacy. It got war crimes and missile barrages in return. And I think there's three main areas that need to be explored. There's factual errors, there's rhetorical errors, and there's diplomacy or courtesy errors. So going through the factual stuff first. Look at this, where Vance misrepresents what's going on.
I want to respond to this. So look, for 4 years in the United States of America, we had a president who stood up at press conferences and talked tough about Vladimir Putin, and then Putin invaded Ukraine and destroyed a significant chunk of the country. The path to peace and the path to prosperity is maybe engaging in diplomacy. We tried the pathway of Joe Biden of thumping our chest and pretending that the President of the United States' words mattered more than the President of the United States' actions. What makes America a good country is America engaging in diplomacy. That's what President Trump is doing.
Trump's administration was actually criticized for being too accommodating towards Russia. And despite some military aid to Ukraine, Trump's consistently undermined NATO, delayed military assistance to Ukraine for personal political leverage, as seen, for example, in the impeachment scandal, and it continued in the Republican delays to weapons being sent to Ukraine over Christmas, and downplaying Russian aggression. Moreover, Putin didn't invade Ukraine during Trump's presidency, but in 2022 under Biden. And Zelenskyy immediately challenges this narrative, pointing out that Russian aggression began in 2014 under Obama. Actually, I think it began in 2012 with the paramilitary subversion in Donbass, and it continued through Trump's tenure and culminated in full-scale invasion under Biden. So a series of presidents are involved in witnessing and in part being engaged in this process. Then you've got Trump's timeline confusion, where he's talking about 2015, and Putin invaded Crimea in 2014, not 2015, and Trump's confusion about basic historical events undermines his authority in this discussion.
2015.
2014. 2014 and 2015.
2014?
Yeah. So
I was not here.
And Zelensky corrects him immediately, underscoring that the conflict predates both Biden and Trump's presidencies. And then Trump claims that Putin that Putin respected him. He says he didn't break them with me, he wants to make a deal. Putin's expansionist policies were not deterred by Trump. Rather, Trump's actions, such as undermining NATO, praising Putin, signaling US disengagement, in all likelihood encouraged Russian assertiveness and Russian opportunities. Zelensky's argument challenges the Trump claim that he could deal with Putin, as he underscores that diplomatic agreements didn't prevent continued Russian aggression. It's just Trump is not aware of it. And then you've got this false comparison between military aid packages. Obama gave you sheets, I gave you javelins. Obama's administration did provide non-lethal aid. It provided radar systems and armoured Humvees, but was cautious about providing lethal aid because of fears of escalation. And Trump's administration approved the Javelin missiles, but with restrictions that prevented their use in active combat zones at the time. Biden lifted those restrictions. And the claim implies a stark contrast that doesn't exist in reality. Both administrations contributed some military support and some restrictions, though both with different approaches. And then you've got the rhetorical errors. And the rhetorical errors start off with Vance's stuff, because almost all of this is Vance. The path to peace and the path to prosperity is maybe engaging in diplomacy. Vance suggests that Biden's approach is confrontational, while Trump's approach is diplomatic. But this ignores that Trump's foreign policy was often erratic and transactional rather than grounded in sustained diplomatic strategy. And Zelensky exposes this by saying, what kind of diplomacy? Referencing past broken agreements, including those he personally signed with Putin, Merkel and Macron. And then you've got the appalling ad hominem attack on Zelensky that came out of nowhere.
I'm talking about
Listen to this.
Diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the president for trying to bring an end to this conflict.
Have you ever been to Ukraine that you say what problems we have?
This is a rhetorical deflection designed to shift focus from the substance of Zelensky's argument to the setting of the discussion. It ignores the validity of Zelensky's concerns about failed diplomacy and turns the discussion into a criticism of decorum, of courtesy, rather than fact. And Zelensky challenges this with, have you ever been to Ukraine? Exposing Vance's lack of first-hand experience while making broad claims about Ukraine's military struggles. How can Vance talk so confidently and so dismissively about Ukraine's military struggles when he hasn't actually been to visit the country? He hasn't been to visit the country because he's too afraid to actually get on a train at the Polish border and go across by Lviv to Kyiv, because he's worried about getting hit with a missile. Trump's false equivalence between Ukraine's survival and gratitude. He continues this attack as if it's been pre-planned.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right
And Trump
now.
implies that because the US provides aid, Ukraine must not question US policies. This is a rhetorical fallacy, conflating gratitude with subservience. Zelensky repeatedly acknowledges gratitude. He says, I said thanks. But Trump and Vance ignore his words and continue demanding submission, creating a false premise that Ukraine has been ungrateful. And actually, like any child who has been rebuked for not saying thank you, it makes Zelensky look weak and it makes Zelensky look foolish. It makes Zelensky look ungrateful. But he's not. There's video after video of him thanking the American people for their help. And then the issue of propaganda. You bring people, you bring them on a propaganda tour, Mr. President. This is an error. This dismisses legitimate reports about Ukraine's military and political struggles as propaganda. It dismisses those people who have been brave enough, unlike Vance and Trump, to take that train trip from the Polish border into Kyiv and see Ukraine for themselves. It dismisses this as propaganda rather than what it genuinely is, which is support. And Zelensky doesn't deny Ukraine's problems, but contextualizes them within the reality of war. Vance's statement is an attempt to delegitimize any criticism of Trump's policy by framing Zelensky's argument as dishonest, and it's fallacious. You don't know that. Don't tell us how we're going to feel. Zelensky was making a legitimate point here about the potential global consequences of the war, but Trump shuts him down aggressively, refusing to engage in the argument. This is a clear failure of statesmanship, as it alienates an ally in a time of war. It belittles an ally in a time of war. It's an attempt to destroy the carefully constructed image of a wartime leader. This is abhorrent in the extreme. Abhorrent in the extreme. And then the interruptions. No, you've done a lot of talking. Interrupting a head of state mid-response is unnecessarily combative and unprofessional. I am astonished that Zelensky remains measured, while Trump and Vance repeatedly steamroll the conversation to control the narrative. And then there's Vance's completely bizarre ad hominem attack on Zelensky. You went to Pennsylvania and campaigned for the opposition in October. Vance falsely suggests that Zelensky interfered in US elections, which distorts diplomatic norms, when we know the people who were interfering in US elections were controlled by the Kremlin. Ukraine has had no role in choosing US leaders, and this accusation is a distraction. Zelensky denies the claim, but Vance uses it as a justification for dismissing Ukrainian concerns. And then, are you saying you don't want a ceasefire? I want a ceasefire. Trump frames Zelensky as a warmonger for not immediately agreeing to a ceasefire, but Zelensky clearly explains that Ukraine wants a ceasefire with guarantees, not an untrustworthy Russian ceasefire that would cement territorial losses. Trump's oversimplification of ceasefires and diplomacy dismisses Ukraine's national security concerns, reducing a complex war to a deal-making exercise. There are 6 main points to take away. 1. That Vance's false narrative of Trump's strength and Biden's weakness, which is challenged by Zelensky's recounting of failed diplomatic attempts. 2. Trump's ahistorical take on Russian aggression, which is exposed by Zelensky correcting the timeline. 3. Vance's dismissal of Ukrainian war struggles as propaganda, which is met with Zelensky's direct challenge, have you ever been to Ukraine? 4. Trump's dismissive and assertive, aggressive rhetoric, which particularly in shutting down Zelensky's point about the global consequences of not stopping Putin. 5. Vance's demands for public gratitude, which are contradicted by Zelensky, who says he's already expressed thanks multiple times. And 6. Trump's simplistic ceasefire argument, which ignores Ukraine's valid concerns about enforceability. This conversation reflects a broader failure of diplomacy where Vance and Trump prioritize theatrics, dominance, and transactional thinking over genuine problem-solving and strategic discourse. This was not about a conversation. This was a calculated attempt to blame Zelensky for scuppering the peace process. This, I think, was an entirely manufactured squabble, steamrollered by Vance, to give Trump a way out of something which was beyond him. Trump promised to establish peace within 1 day. Then he raised it to 100 days. Now he realizes he can't do it, and he can't broker peace. And rather than admitting that it's beyond him, he is throwing the blame onto Zelenskyy. I'm amazed Zelenskyy kept his cool. But when you go through the details of this, when you look at the details of this press conference, which was screened by TASS live in Moscow, it is almost impossible to imagine that anybody could keep their cool and keep their professional wits about them. Zelenskyy does, and Zelenskyy walks away from it with his head held high. How long Zelenskyy can now continue, I don't know. I hope he has enough support to keep going. But Trump and Vance have shown their hand to continue the card imagery, and both of them are deeply inadequate. And it's shocking that that two of these people have power in the most important country in the world. It is utterly shocking, and what I'd like to establish very clearly is this wasn't about three people squabbling. This is about two people ganging up on somebody to take them down and to make them look stupid. And when it's analysed, that person, Zelenskyy, looks even more heroic than before, and the stupidity is in Vance and Trump, and there's no doubt at all about it. But I don't think that's how it's being reported, and I am amazed that there hasn't been a breakdown of the way this argument took place. So this is my contribution.